This week I got to talk with Kristen L. about her debut mystery thriller, We Don't Talk About Carol. I was so sucked into this book, I could not put it down. I had to a few times, and I hated every moment that I wasn't reading it. And it just consumed my mind. The characters feel so real, the family dynamics are so complicated, and the mystery is intergenerational. Here is what it's about. In the wake of her grandmother's passing, Sydney Singleton finds a hidden photograph of a little girl who looks more like Sydney than her own sister or mother. She soon discovers the mystery girl in the photograph is her Aunt Carol, who was one of 6 local North Carolina Black girls to go missing in the 1960s. For the last several decades, not a soul has talked about Carol or what really happened to her. With her grandmother gone and Sydney looking to start a family of her own, she's determined to unravel the truth behind her long-lost aunt and the sinister silence surrounding her. Unfortunately, this is familiar territory for Sydney. Several years prior, working a crime beat as a journalist on the case of another missing girl, her obsession eventually led to a psychotic break. And now, in the suffocating grip of fertility treatments and a marriage that's beginning to crumble, Sydney's relentless pursuit might just lead her down the same path of destruction. As she delves deeper into Carol's fate, her own troubled past resurfaces, clawing its way to the surface with a vengeance. The web of secrets and lies entangling her family leaves Sydney questioning everything. Her fixation on the missing girls, her future as a mom, and everyone she's come to trust. Delving into family, community, secrets, and motherhood, We Don't Talk About Carol is a gripping and deeply emotional story about overcoming the rotten roots of your family tree and what we'll do for those we love. If you've been listening for a while, you know this story is like right up my alley. I just loved it. I cannot believe this is her debut. I was so immersed in the writing and in the characters. It is just fantastic. And the ending, what I'm going to say is DM me when you read this and we can talk about that ending. That being said, let's hear from Kristen. I am here with Kristen L. this week, and I am so excited to talk about We Don't Talk About Carol, which is actually kind of funny when you say it, but thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Kate.
Yeah. So I started to see this book I don't know, a few weeks ago, because I feel like I read it recently. Yeah. 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think you're doing an event with Lauren Ling Brown is where I think I saw it, because I love Society of Lies.
Same.
And then I saw her post about it and I was like, oh, I need to check this one out. So I immediately requested on NetGalley, got it, and was like, oh my gosh, I can read this immediately. And I just burned through it. I loved it so much. So
yay! Oh, it's such music to my ears.
I'm sure. It's just so good. But before we get into the book, I do always want to get to know you a little bit, just before we dive in. So when did you know that you wanted to be an author, or what was your I think I want to write fiction moment?
Ooh, it's so funny. I've been listening to a lot of author interviews lately in particular, and I get jealous of the people who have a very specific memory.
Oh, yeah.
For me, it's like asking me to describe the experience of taking my first steps. It's like it's been so ingrained in me for so long. I mean, I've been a voracious reader my entire life. I have these really fond memories of going to libraries and to Barnes and Noble with my mom and my younger sister, and just reading all the books I could, and from a very young age looking to see where my name would be on the fiction shelves, because I always just pictured myself being an author. So it's just been a part of my life forever. I think I started to take it more seriously, I guess, right after college. I wrote my very first very bad practice novel.
Yeah.
And then
they're like that.
yeah, it's good. It's it was my own personal MFA program, was writing that novel. Yes. And then took a very long gap before trying to write another novel. I practiced writing a lot of short stories, just getting a lot better at craft. And then took a class at the UCLA Extension program when I was
Oh,
ready
that's
to
cool.
really give it a little bit more structure, ready to get a little bit more instruction from a
Mm-hmm.
professional, and then started working on my next novel, which became We Don't Talk About Carol, in
Nice.
May of 2020, when a lot of us were
Wow.
making lots of pandemic driven decisions about
Yes.
our lives.
I
So
know
yeah.
that's the one thing for me that was, well, I mean, I'm sure there's more than one, but one of the great things I say with
Hmm.
quotation marks about the pandemic was all these books that I have now talked to people about where they're like, this was actually my pandemic book, or like I started because I had the time. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I mean, I wouldn't wish it on the world, but I'm glad that we got more books.
It was one of those moments. It definitely forced a reset, I think, for
Yeah,
a lot of us. And so it was just
totally.
a time to kind of reevaluate, reprioritize, especially because it was such a dark time. You know,
Yeah.
what really matters to us. So it also forced me to think, like, okay, these short stories I'm working on are great, but I'm sort of half-heartedly submitting them to literary magazines. You
Right.
know, like my true passion is novels. It's what I tend to read the most. So it just felt like,
Hmm.
okay, if you're going to do it, now is a wonderful time to start.
Yeah, I think it really was. It sounds like so you kind of took a class right before you started writing this book. What did that inform your writing process, or kind of like what has been your writing process? Do you plot? Do you go off vibes? What does it look
Mm,
like?
excellent question. So I took this class several years before I started working
Oh, okay.
on this book, but it was very beneficial in that some of my classmates have become my longest standing writing
Oh, that's
group
cool.
partners. Yes, so that writing group read every chapter as I wrote We Don't Talk About Carol and gave me feedback in real time,
Nice.
which was super helpful. So this book was fully pantsed, if you want to
Yeah.
go with the plotter versus pantser style. So
Yes.
definitely wrote this by the seat of my pants. I
Uh huh.
had no idea how it was going to end, honestly, for a very long time. It actually
Yeah.
caught me by surprise when I took.
Really, I mean, and it's a great ending, but that's, I mean, it would catch me by surprise too.
Thank you. Yeah, so I basically I had the initial idea, the premise. I knew I wanted
Hmm.
it to center on a woman who discovered that she had an aunt who went missing back in the 1960s, that her family never
Hmm.
talked about her, that she was one of six Black girls to go missing from the same neighborhood, and that in addition to that mystery, she has, you know, already kind of full and complicated life that she's trying to
Hmm.
navigate with her marriage and their her and her husband's IVF journey,
Nice.
and then a lot of things that she's trying to unpack from her own childhood. So I knew I wanted all those elements to be in play, but I
Hmm.
didn't quite know how they were all going to intersect and play out throughout the rest of the novel until I
Yeah.
like the analogy. It's definitely not something I've coined. I don't know which author did, but the idea
Uh-huh.
of writing as though you're driving in fog and you can
Yes.
only see, you know, a few feet in front of your car. That's sort of
Yes.
the writing process I took with We Don't Talk About Carol.
Yeah, I've heard that where people talk about like you can drive from New York to California only seeing like 100 feet ahead of you. And it is such a good analogy because it does like, especially like that coast to coast analogy is like, oh, that's a really long way. And like really does help you visualize that if you just get started on something, like you can do it if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. I think it makes it less daunting, to be
I agree.
honest. I think if I thought that I needed to have the book fully plotted out in advance,
Yeah.
it might have felt like a scary thing to just to begin. But the idea of
Yeah.
just like, hey, let's start. You have an idea for how the story opens, you know,
Yeah.
why don't you just try writing that and see where it takes you? And then it was
Mhm.
also fun because, you know, as a big reader, I was able
Mhm.
to ask myself, like, okay, if I were reading this book, what would be the
Yes.
most interesting or satisfying thing that could happen next?
Yes.
Um, and that's sort of like how all the different aspects of the plot unfolded from that
That's so
question.
cool. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned like the core idea was like this woman who kind of discovers she had family that she didn't know about and that Carol went missing along with five other black girls, if there are six in
Mm,
total.
yes.
And your dedication said for the tens of thousands of Black Americans reported missing every year and for the thousands more who never stop looking. So obviously that was a really big inspiration point as well for the story. Did that kind of shape, I'm assuming that probably shaped a lot of the plot and like how you chose to handle it?
It did, definitely. Yeah, it was. I've listened to lots of true crime podcasts over the years. I was listening to lots of them during my socially distanced pandemic walks. And it was during one
Yeah.
of those podcasts that I learned about the discrepancies when it comes to missing people of color in America. And that, when it
Mhm.
comes to Black Americans, for example, our cases are less likely to be covered by the press, our cases are less likely to be solved. And,
Mhm.
thinking about that as a Black woman, as when I think about these stats, I'm thinking about myself. I'm thinking about my sisters. I'm thinking about
Mhm.
my nephews and niece. And so it felt very personal. So I thought that there was an interesting opportunity to maybe shed light on that
Mhm.
issue through kind of a suspenseful story.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
because I think, I don't know, fiction to me is such a great way of gaining empathy for different people
Yes.
and situations and learning about things that you might not have been aware of
Mhm.
before. And so I thought there
Mhm.
was a really great opportunity to sort of tell that story and to make it personal by
Yes.
tying it back to a missing person in my main character's own life.
Mhm. I feel like one of the things I kind of noticed, like as I was reading, and I remember being like what, 20 years old, and like watching Mad Men, and that was the moment that I realized that like the education system did not make me aware of how recent like both the civil rights movement, but also still just like Jim Crow South, like we were
Yes.
not really talking about how recent it is, and that like there are people related just like one generation behind them that were having to, I mean, fight that fight, go through all of the things that were happening there. You have a couple of moments in the books where you kind of talk about that, where like Sydney is also realizing like I can't believe it was actually this bad this recent, but then she's kind of like but also I can, because it's not like things are great either. And so I feel like it made it more, it was another reading experience where I was like, yes, this is like so much more recent than we actually think it is, to have someone whose aunt went missing at that time, and then really no one cared about this trend of black girls going missing. So I really found that was effective, and kind of to your point, it does make it more personal, and it does make you realize like we're not far away from it.
No, absolutely. I mean, and so this work is completely fictional, except there were a few pieces that were very much inspired by sort of my own family story. Just that, my mom, for example, helped to desegregate her school in North
Wow.
Carolina growing up. And I also asked for her permission to use it's an aside, sort of an anecdote in the story, but there is the moment when I believe Barbara is talking about a memory of being at a lunch counter, a
Mm-hmm.
segregated lunch counter in Raleigh, North Carolina, where the part of the book
Yes.
takes place, and going up to the lunch counter, not realizing, not understand, being too young to realize what segregation is and Jim Crow laws are, and
Right.
being, told in a very disparaging manner that she's not welcome there. That entire aside and anecdote was something that my mom experienced herself. And
Mm,
it gives me chills even talking about it, that,
I know.
this just one generation
Yeah.
beyond that. And then, yes, though, how it's also still very much something that's present, maybe in different ways today. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
wrote this, much of the book at the, beginning of the summer of 2020. So
Yeah.
as, we were, having a racial justice reckoning in America related to the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others. So
Yes.
it was these things were very top of mind for me as I wrote the
Yeah.
novel.
I had it all just kind of came together, but I had this strange confluence of I was listening to Matriarch by Tina Knowles while,
Yes.
and then I requested this book and got it. So it was really interesting that I was like listening to an autobiography or a memoir where like that was what stood out to me the most when I even got to the end of it, is like the generation before her, like, still like segregated, still being treated so horribly, her parents are. And then there's her, and then her daughter is Beyonce. It's like
Yes.
those are two such different things to have on either side. But like, I mean, obviously it's great that her daughter's Beyonce and was able to become who Beyonce is at this point. But I was listening to that at the same time that I was reading this, and I was like, wow, some of these are like hugely similar parallels as well, because they were in in Texas, not North Carolina. But where else was I going with that?
But it
Oh,
is
I
interesting.
completely
I
lost it.
do. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it is, those things really contextual. Those examples, those specific
Yeah.
examples from people that you are familiar with, it just really
Mm-hmm.
contextualizes the issue and the recency,
Yeah,
with some of
totally.
these pieces of history that are
Yes.
not that historical, like
Right.
still so
Right.
steeped in the present in so many ways.
Yes. That the other thing that was happening was the plantation in Louisiana was burning
Oh
down.
yeah.
So that was the other fascinating thing that was happening while I was reading this. And so there was this line in the book that she's like talking about the houses in the area of
Mm.
Raleigh that they are, and it says like color blocked, you're saying, I guess, not she. Color blocked siding and dark fixtures gave them a modern look, but something about the columns and porches whispered hauntingly of plantation homes, which like I
Mm.
saw was a beautiful sentence in general.
Thank
But
you.
it was like I like read that and then like got on Threads, and all of a sudden it's like it won't stop burning, and I was like,
Oh
oh my
gosh.
goodness, like all of this is just coming together. But I feel like that was another example. Was it kind of like important to you to like even show that like passing stuff like that is going to be kind of like triggering your generational trauma still?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And it was also, the Sydney, the main character, she lives in
Hmm.
LA. A lot of these things that happened occurred in Raleigh. It's a
Hmm.
place that is, it's a really important part of her family's history, but it's not a place that she has a really strong familiarity with, or her
Yeah.
own personal connections to. And that's also familiar for me. My mom was born and raised in Raleigh. I visited Raleigh in the past growing up, but I also did a little research trip while I was
Oh, nice.
writing the book. And it's just also interesting to notice some of those differences. I think
Hmm.
if you are not from a place that was steeped in some of those histories. So, just
Yes.
driving through and seeing some of these historical places and the placards and understanding,
Hmm.
what occurred there was really, does stir up some difficult memories
Yeah.
and feelings. And so I did want to weave that into the book where I could.
If you're an author, chances are high that you just want to spend your time writing and maybe reading, not thinking about social media, what to create, and what to post. And the good news is, I have a solution for you. With just 3 hours of in person filming, you can receive 90 days or 3 months worth of social media content. The content is a mixture of videos, photos, edited reels, and when you receive the content, you also receive a PDF that's a content calendar that links to all of the content, tells you exactly when to post it, and gives you an option for captions. And if you've ever felt like you're tired of just talking about your book all the time, we will help you come up with ideas that are general content for your page that's not just all about your books. If you are tired of thinking about your social media presence and just want to get back to writing, check out the link in the description. I think one of the other ways, or one of the other things I thought was like interesting, so their family dynamic is very complex between
Yes.
Sydney and her sister, but also Sydney and her mom, and also all three of them, and like every variation is it's complicated. And I really appreciated, because like I love thrillers and mystery, but like I also just love when there's like character work too. So like
Mm.
when both of them come together, I love it. And I felt like we really got to understand like why Sydney reacted the way she did, why Sasha reacted the way she did. But something they grew up with a lot, there was, without getting into spoilers, there was a lot of emotional and sometimes physical turmoil
Hmm.
in their house, and they were very much taught the belief, or the whatever, the I don't know, like platitude of like what happens in this family stays in this family. And that was like something that was very directly said to me growing up as well.
Mm.
And it does make it makes it hard for you to connect with people when you are stressed out about something that's happening, but it was also making me, as I was reading it, and I think you kind of bring that point back near the end, is like the added, sorry, my dog just jumped up behind me and I didn't know she was in here. Whew. I was like, I thought I was alone in here. The fact that like in the situation of a Black family, especially in that time period, it's also that like you can't trust that telling people is going to do anything, or it might end up hurting all of you because they're just not going to receive it as well. So did that kind of come to you as you were writing it, or like how did that part kind of come about?
No, definitely. I mean, I also grew up in a what happens in this house stays in this house family. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a very generational
I
sort
think it
of
is.
mentality, you know. I
Yeah.
think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of us now are more of a, we embrace therapy and,
Yes.
being vulnerable and speaking about the things that have,
Mm-hmm.
the difficult experiences we've had. But I was really interested in exploring that dynamic. But I think in writing the novel, it also gave me a chance to think about why that phrase sort of in family mantra came about and why it's so prevalent, and how in a situation where, if you are, for example, living in the Jim Crow South, and
Yeah.
maybe the thing that your strongest currency is your reputation, your family's reputation, your family's good name, how damaging it could be for
Yes.
certain things to come out about your family.
Mm-hmm.
And that it can be sort of a double-edged sword, though,
Mm-hmm.
of like, yes, it protects your family's reputation, but it can also make it really difficult for you as individuals to move on or to
Mm-hmm.
process the things you've gone through and to
Yeah.
really deal with them. And so I was really interested in that idea of, if you want to break generational curses, first you have to
Mm-hmm.
be willing to acknowledge them.
Yeah.
And so that was something that, yeah, I was very interested in exploring in the
Totally.
book.
Yeah. There's I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but there's also basically Sydney experienced her childhood and Sasha experienced her childhood, and we're mostly in Sydney's mind at first, obviously, so that's like the version that we are getting as well. But I thought it was cool how you also ended up showing like you still can have very different experiences growing up in the same house, and then the way that they were able to kind of talk to each other later in life to kind of reconcile that was cool. And then the relationship with her mom is very difficult too. So was there anything about like sister and mother dynamics that like stood out to you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know you've mentioned really enjoying suspenseful stories that also do a lot of
Mm-hmm.
character work. I mean, I think family dramas are also like,
Mm-hmm.
suspense is my favorite genre probably, but I think family drama is a close second.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I really am interested in the fact that two people can grow up in the same house, having the same experiences, and have completely different takeaways from those
Mm-hmm.
experiences and see them through two very different lenses. And also just sort of, you know, I think sibling relationships can be very challenging because, yes, you may share, you know, DNA and
Yes.
certain experiences, but you can be completely different people who look at the
Yeah.
world in totally different ways. But there's sort of an expectation of closeness,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a given, especially
Mm-hmm.
once you grow up and leave the house. It's not a given
Mm-hmm.
that you will maintain, a strong relationship. And if you have some of those, difficult things that you haven't worked through, or challenges you
Yeah.
haven't worked through, things like that, it can really make it hard to have a healthy
Mm-hmm.
relationship as adults. And it's also very difficult, I think, um, to step out of old roles. So if you grew up as an older sibling and you always thought that you knew best, and I mean, I'm very much older sister energy, so I'm an older
Same.
sister. I definitely bring that to my own sibling relationship. It
Yes.
can be difficult to step outside of that and think, okay, when this person is now an adult, they have the
Yes.
ability to make their own decisions with their lives. They can look at the
Mm-hmm.
world how they naturally look at it. It's not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
wrong or right. So yeah, I think that that's rife, I think, for lots of opportunities to explore challenges in terms of how that can, make a relationship difficult, but can also make it rewarding if you're able to navigate your way through that.
Yeah. You can gain like other people's perspective, which kind of to your point about books too, like the way books help you have empathy. It's like the same thing. We end up having more empathy the more we learn about Sasha as well, and kind of like her perspective. The other thing, you were mentioning how you wanted Sydney to like be interested in this, but also have like a very full life of things going on. And boy, does she at this point in her life. The other big thing she's tackling is that she is going through IVF treatments. She and her husband have had trouble getting pregnant and have not having it work for them. And so throughout the whole book, the amount of things you tackled about what is scary about motherhood was like, I really appreciated. You dive into like even the way that kind of no matter what, even with a supportive partner, women tend to take on more, even if it's just the fact that your body has to do all of the work. The kind of like fear of losing your freedom or your identity, but also she's felt kind of apathetic about it her whole life. She doesn't know how she feels about it. So what was that like, just like mining all of that kind of part of her life?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Sydney and I are both the same age when I started the book. So we were both in our late 30s when I started writing this. And at that age, I feel like you're being bombarded with questions about whether you're planning on having children from your friends, from your family, from your doctors, from strangers on social media. Like everyone has a question and an opinion. And I think it can be really tough, especially if you aren't sure how you feel. I think that attitudes are starting to come around when it comes to people who are definitively certain that they don't want to have children. But I think that it can be difficult if you fall in the gray area where you're not sure, where like you're still sort of in the place of, oh, if the circumstances are right. And yet, unfortunately, if you have a uterus, your biological clock is ticking. And so if you want to try to have children, yourself, without medical intervention, or even with medical intervention, you do have limited time. And also like at that point, a lot of my friends were either having children or struggling with being parents or struggling to become parents. And so it's very top of mind for me. But it also seemed very tied to everything that Sydney was going through, and sort of all of the unresolved issues that she had with her family. And I was aware that, people with childhood traumas, especially ones that have been unprocessed, can lead to people feeling apathetic about the idea of becoming parents themselves, out of like, whether it's a deep-seated fear of perpetuating certain traumas or other things. So I was interested in exploring that. I did feel deeply connected. I always get frustrated if I'm reading a book and suddenly they're able to drop everything to pursue a mystery, because I'm like, I have a complicated life.
I have thought about that. Yes.
I'm like, well, who's doing your job? Who's taking care of the house? Like, how are you able to just jet off and it not be a problem for your life? And so I did think about, okay, well, how can she have this very kind of full life where that's also a bit of the challenge of the story and the suspense of the story is like, yes, how can she solve this mystery? But also like, will she be able to keep her marriage and her job and all these other pieces?
Totally. We were watching Poker Face last week, actually, which is like a really fun, it's like a 70s mystery whodunit almost. But we were watching it and that's what happened. At one point I turned to my husband and I'm like, wait, how is she making money? Because the idea is she just like drives around in every new town. I mean, we know it's fantastical for the sake of this, whatever. But she just like arrives in different towns where some crazy murder has happened. And I'm like, wait a second. Where's the money coming from?
Right? How's she putting gas in this car?
Console. Yes, it is like that's one of the things you have to suspend your disbelief about so much, is that someone
Yes,
could just get obsessed and like not have to do anything else.
totally.
So that probably is why Sydney felt real, or because I had answers to those questions.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing you kind of touched on there at the end, I don't know why my allergies are coming for me right
Oh,
now.
'tis the season.
Right. Um, was she also kind of gets there's a point where she talks about how she's scared that she might be all of the worst parts of
Mm,
both parents. And I
mm-hmm.
was like, oh my gosh. I feel like I'm sure lots of people feel that way no matter what the severity of something that happened in their
Yeah.
childhood was. But like, was that to kind of, I mean, that ramped up the suspense for me, at least. Was that kind of where you were headed with that?
Totally. And I think like when you mentioned to all the different fears that she had around having children,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a common one too, especially if you grew up in an imperfect,
Yes.
upbringing. I think that it's a common fear. And even just as an adult, I think it's you look at your parents through so many different lenses, and
Yeah.
you see them more clearly as people.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course I think it's natural to hope that maybe you emulate the best in them, but you might also
Mm-hmm.
have fears about perpetuating the not great things
Yes.
that they brought to
Totally.
the table as well. And so yeah, I
Yeah.
thought that was an interesting piece to kind of explore too.
Yeah, totally. Um, so there's also this point where she is like obsessed with kind of figuring this out.
Mm.
And her husband says, like, if this is such a systemic problem, like, why do you think you're gonna be the one to solve it?
Mm.
Which is like a really good question, but we're all like, because she wants to know the answer, or like whatever. But it's like you still I'm trying not to give anything away, but
Sure.
I feel like part of the story too, though, is like there can be some forward movement if like even just one person cares. And was that kind of also what you wanted to do, like thematically?
Absolutely. I think because it's a really slippery slope between saying that you can't solve an entire problem and becoming
Mm-hmm.
completely apathetic to the
Yeah.
problem. I also appreciated that she kind of turns it right back to him and is like, well,
I do. I
why?
loved that.
She's like, he has this company that is helping, to Black Americans in particular with becoming more financially literate and secure through a variety of tools. And so she's, like,
Yes.
well, why do you think you could solve the financial literacy problem?
I
Like,
loved that part. I had the whole thing highlighted. I was like, yeah, girl, remind him.
remind him, like, why is it okay for you to try to solve these big problems and it's not okay for
Exactly.
her? But I think
Uh-huh.
something that was also top of mind for me is like in researching for the book, I also learned about organizations like the Black and Missing Foundation, which
Mhm.
it's a nonprofit that does really incredible work to help um, people of color, missing people of color and their families kind of help to find justice, help to, put the proper amount of attention on these
Mhm.
stories that are often overlooked by traditional press.
Yeah.
And so it was really meaningful to me to show that, like, no, you can make a difference as an individual,
Yeah.
especially when you come together with a community to try and solve a problem. I think that was really
Mhm.
powerful. And, you know, otherwise too you're just looking at these stats and feeling
Yes.
defeated and depressed, and you could do that, or you could try to do something about it, do your
Mhm.
part, no matter
Yeah,
how small. So I thought that
totally.
was, yeah, something that I wanted to come across. I was also really interested in exploring, when is it okay to be passionate about something, and like
Yeah.
where's the line between passion and obsession.
Yeah.
Our girl Sydney does toe that line
Mhm.
quite a bit, but I always wanted to explore that too because
Mhm.
also her husband Malik, she references that he was able to you know get really intense when he was building his business and turning
Yes.
their walls into whiteboards. And so why is it okay for him with this one
Mhm.
interest, but it's not okay for her to kind of put the same level of
Yes.
work and passion into
Yes.
solving what happened to these missing girls?
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, there were a few times where I was not a Malik fan, which I am overall, but there are a few times where I was like, get away from him. Because I was feeling the same way. I was like, he gets to have this full life though. Like, why does she get questioned?
I like that. I like for every character to be complicated. You know, like
they did do that so well, because there were times I was pretty frustrated with Sasha too, where I'm like, why can't you like see this perspective? But then when you learn about her, you're like, oh, okay, that's why she's like coping this way.
Yeah.
And we all have our weird coping strategies.
We do. And I think that this also came back to in some lesson that I learned in a creative writing class at some point, just about the idea that in fiction and in life, there are few true heroes and few true villains. And so I really like that idea of kind of complicating every character. Right. Because most villains don't see themselves as villains, for example. No. I think it's like interesting just to think about, you know, having these people be multifaceted as well.
Yeah. I think that's something cool. It works so well in like thriller, suspense, mystery, or whatever, because sometimes it is like you're so into one perspective, and then like knowing that there's extra information, you're like, oh, okay. So I feel like I like it in like mysteries kind of probably for that reason. It probably fits the genre well too.
I agree. I completely agree. Because it also, you're kind of questioning everybody in a mystery too. And so I think like when they are a little bit complicated, you know, you're like, oh, this person could go in a lot of different directions. Just makes it for a more interesting read.
It does. The setting though felt like very like atmospheric and immersive as well. And I know you said your mom grew up in Raleigh, or at least in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Did you grow up there ever at all, or was it kind of like just that research trip and talking to your mom?
No, it was really, I grew up in right outside of Detroit, in the suburbs of Detroit. Okay. And I do live in Los Angeles now. So the Los Angeles scenes are easy to write.
Yes.
And I lived in the Bay Area for a while, which is also kind of has a cameo appearance in the book.
Yes.
But I never lived in Raleigh. So it was really just a lot of Google Maps and, you know, Street View research and then the research trip, which was really helpful to kind of really feel you know, what Raleigh feels like, especially if you're someone who is not from there. And so, you know, even just from like a climate perspective and weather perspective, if you know, live in Southern California, things are pretty mild, pretty dry. And so it's just sort of interesting to just kind of bring the experience of being in that location to life from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do love that all the cities though were, when you said that, I was like, oh, these are all the places that we go.
It made it slightly easier to write, especially particularly the places that I've lived in before. I was like, oh yeah, I can talk about Detroit in the fall. Absolutely. Let's go.
I wanted to interrupt this episode really quickly. I have a goal of monetizing Bookwild, but I would love to do it without having to have ads in the podcast. And one way that I can do that is through my Patreon community. For those who don't know, Patreon is a community platform that allows creators to share what they're creating behind a paywall. And so that means exclusive content or early releases. The Bookwild Patreon has 2 tiers. The first tier is the bookish tier, and at that tier you get all of the episodes out a day early, and you get access to our private community chat where we can talk about anything book related or TV shows or movies. The second tier is the Bookwild tier, and it includes everything from the first tier but also Bookwild's backlist book club. So this year I've been wanting to also still read more backlist, even though I read plenty of arcs, and Bookwild's Backlist Book Club felt like the perfect way to do that. We meet on Sundays. We are international right now, so Sundays are the best way to do it. And we meet on Zoom, and we all pick a book and we talk about it, and then we talk about everything else we read during the month, and then we pick another book for the next month. So it's been so much fun so far, and we'd love to have you join the book club. So if you'd like to support the Bookwild podcast, you can go to the Patreon link in the show notes, and you can sign up for whichever tier interests you. And if you're looking for a free way to support the show, if you can like and review it on whichever platform you listen to, that helps so much. It was like dawning on me because we went to Detroit a few times growing up, basically. So I live in Indiana, so it's really close.
Yeah.
But I was like very young, and it was like I could look across and see Canada. I was like, wait. I was like, Detroit is that close to Canada? So I was like pulling it. This is one of those books where I was like learning about maps, essentially, or like what's actually located. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I didn't realize that for some reason. I always pictured it like very landlocked.
Yeah, it always tripped me out as a child. I definitely remember going to the riverfront in Detroit and looking across, and you can read some of the signs on the buildings, and that's a different country. It just was and at the time too, it was really easy to go back and forth over the border. And so, you could just decide on a whim to go to a different country. I just loved that. It's very unusual in America. Obviously in other parts of the world, they're like, it's very like, what are you talking about? Why is that unique? But America's so huge that
I know their countries are more like state sizes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my friends and co-host Gare, he lives in upstate New York. So he's also, but he's right by Canada. And I think I always forget too how many states are like right by Canada. Like it's everything up there. I always just think of like New York, and I'm like, no, it's everywhere.
There are a lot of them. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, totally. Well, I just loved it so much. I'm sure.
Thank you.
I'm sure that is apparent. And so for everyone, especially who really loves that same combo, I know I've had conversations with people of like character depth and plot still happening. You guys need to go read this one. Do you read? Do you have any books that you've read recently that you loved?
I am a huge reader. And yes, I think
do you read was not the right way to ask.
No. I know you're going with it. I got it. Yes, I read a lot. I read pretty widely, though. This year, I've been really focused on other 2025 debuts. Which has been really lovely because I'm connecting with them too as people. And so there's something I nerd out on, getting to know the people who have written books I really love. So some of the ones that I've really enjoyed recently from my fellow debut class in 2025, Julie Chan is Dead. And I know you spoke with Leanne Zhang, and I also love her. She's a delightful human. Very cool. Loved that book.
It's so good.
so good. I hope it gets adapted into something, because I think it would make for a great screen adaptation. It's so entertaining. I've heard people describe it as sort of Yellowface meets Bunny, and I think that really hits it. Yeah. Yes. I love that one. I also really loved Bearer of Bad News by Elizabeth Deeney. It's wonderful. It's about a woman. She's like a down on her luck Las Vegas hairstylist, and she winds up taking a job to be someone's bearer of bad news. So to go track down this person's sipster to deliver some bad news. And so it's like it's a wonderful combination of being a fun romp, but it also has a lot of kind of character depth. Nice. And I don't want to give anything away, but it has a lot, like a deeper meaning as well. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Yes. Really fun. That was great. And then Tilt by Emma Patty. I don't know if you're familiar.
I just started seeing that everywhere. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I haven't read it.
Excellent. It's about a woman. She's 9 months pregnant, and shopping for a crib in IKEA in Portland, Oregon, when the big earthquake hits, and she has to try to walk home through a destroyed city. So it's fascinating. It's sort of a survival story, but then she's also really thinking about, her marriage, her feelings about motherhood, and also her feelings about, I think she's a failed playwright, essentially. The main character is a failed playwright. And so she's also kind of struggling with, when do you give up your art? For real, for quote unquote real life responsibilities. So it's fascinating. Such a great read. Wow. Loved that one.
That sounds really good. I was coincidentally, and she thinks you guys have the same agent, but I was recording with Hallie Sutton last night. Ooh. And because I mentioned your book, she's like, wait, I think we have the same agent. I was like, oh, nice.
Small world.
So she was saying, she's like, I'm gonna have to. I was telling her the whole story that I saw Lauren Ling Brown's post, and she was like, are you kidding me? And she's like, well, I have to go because she lives like right there, so I think she'll be there too. But we were just talking, we did a whole episode on like creativity versus like commerce, or like the commercial part of it. So we were kind of just talking about that. So now I'm going to have to text her and be like, now we need to read this book.
You should read it. It's also just really fascinating, very propulsive, very immersive. Nice. As somebody who lives, I live in California, also very earthquake prone. It was very terrifying. Did make me think a lot about my emergency plan.
I get that. That's like, I've lived in Indiana my whole life, and I had never seen like I don't really watch like weather tragedy. I can't think of why. I'm trying to think of a different word. But when we saw Twisters last summer, I was like, oh, this is actually terrifying. And I'm just so used to like getting a tornado watch and being like, oh, it's like 10 miles away. Right. And I've just never seen one in person. But when I was sitting in the theater, I was like, oh, this is terrifying.
Terrifying. I also grew up in the Midwest. So I was also familiar with, I've seen the sky turn weird colors. And you're like, oh, okay, that's, you're like, why is it green?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I had this other hilarious thing happen because basically I posted a story of me just like taking stuff into the post office, but you grew up with them too, I'm sure. They do the practice or like they practice the tornado siren every other Friday, I think. And so I basically, in my story, I'm like, ignore the tornado siren, of course it started right now. And I had people who like had never lived near tornadoes responding. They're like, you're just walking around while that's going on. And I'm like, you see like the sky behind me, like it's beautiful outside. So like people didn't know that we had to trial them, and everyone's like, why were you bringing the merch then? You didn't have to. I was like, oh my gosh.
Just a
drill. You don't think of those things when you don't like live near them.
No, it's so true. I honestly forgot about that.
I know. Every time it happens, my dogs howl with it. So it is just so much noise on Fridays here.
A surround sound experience.
Yes, it really is. Well, everyone needs to go read We Don't Talk About Carol. And where can people follow you to stay up to date?
Sure. I am at Kristen L. Berry on all the platforms that I'm on. So that's really Instagram, TikTok, Substack. And my website is also kristenlberry.com.
That's easy.
I tried, really try to brand that.
Totally. Well, I will put those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for talking with me today.
It's been a real pleasure. You ask very excellent questions, Kate, I have to say. It's very clear that you are a true reader. So this was a joy.
Yeah, I had so much fun.